The recent implementation of a substantial 17% tariff on the vast majority of Mexican tomato imports has sent a shockwave of uncertainty and economic instability cascading through the American food industry. Welcome viewers to my channel. Please subscribe, like my video, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next update. This dramatic policy shift, which effectively and abruptly dismantled the tomato suspension agreement, a framework that had been the bedrock of the cross-border tomato trade for nearly 3 decades, has left a vacuum filled with deep apprehension. Established in 1996, this agreement had provided a stable and predictable pricing floor, regulating the flow of Mexican tomatoes and fostering a sense of market equilibrium. Its sudden termination and replacement with a new tariff serves as a textbook example of the volatile and often disruptive nature of modern trade policies. This unpredictable environment makes strategic long-term planning a monumental challenge for businesses of all scales and has left both entrepreneurs and consumers with a palpable sense of anxiety about what the future holds for food prices, supply chains, and availability. For countless small business owners, this tariff is not merely an economic irritant. It is a direct and existential threat to their livelihoods. Teresa Razzo, the passionate and dedicated owner of 2 highly regarded Argentine-Italian restaurants, Villa Roma in Laguna Hills and Cambele Grill in Fountain Valley, is facing what she describes as a dire and potentially fatal crisis. Her culinary establishment's very identity and financial viability are inextricably linked to a consistent and affordable supply of fresh, high-quality tomatoes. This foundational ingredient is a non-negotiable component of her entire menu, from the vibrant, fresh-sliced tomatoes that adorn her salads to the rich, savory, and meticulously crafted marinara sauces that are the very heart and soul of her pizzas and pasta dishes. Razzo has already voiced a grim and specific forecast. If her ingredient costs rise as expected due to the new tariffs, she will have no choice but to pass those costs on to her customers by raising her menu prices. She is convinced that this action will inevitably lead to a sharp and unsustainable decline in business. Her loyal patrons, who have long supported her businesses and may have once dined out multiple times a week, will be forced to tighten their household budgets and cut back on discretionary spending, a behavioral shift that could prove fatal for her enterprises. Her chilling prediction is that her restaurants could face financial collapse and bankruptcy within as little as 3 months, a stark and painful illustration of the extreme vulnerability of small businesses to such sudden and sweeping changes in national trade policy. The cascading effects of this decision threaten not just her restaurants, but the employees she employs and the communities she serves. The contentious core of the dispute, dumping versus political posturing and economic nationalism. At the heart of the new tariff policy lies a deep-seated and long-running ideological conflict over the practice of dumping, the strategic sale of goods in a foreign market at a price below their production cost, often subsidized, in order to gain an unfair competitive advantage. The U.S. government's decision to withdraw from the previous agreement was heavily influenced by persistent and intense lobbying from domestic growers, particularly those operating in Florida, who argued vehemently that the agreement had been utterly ineffective in protecting American farmers from what they considered to be unfairly priced Mexican imports. Robert Gunter, the influential executive vice president of the Florida Tomato Exchange, has been a relentless and vocal champion of the new tariffs, framing them as a necessary and long overdue measure to restore fairness and vitality to the American agricultural sector. In his view, the 5 successive trade agreements that have governed the tomato trade for more than 30 years were all fundamentally flawed and had failed to stop what he refers to as the illegal dumping of Mexican tomatoes. He contends that this practice has systematically depressed prices and profitability for domestic farmers, making it impossible for them to compete on a level playing field without government intervention. His argument is rooted in the idea of protecting homegrown industries and jobs, a classic example of economic nationalism. This narrative, however, is met with vehement opposition and a starkly different perspective from across the border. Walberto Solario, a Mexican tomato grower who also serves as the president of the Baja California Agricultural Council, a powerful organization representing more than 120 producers, contends that the claims of widespread dumping are baseless, exaggerated, and largely unfounded. He maintains that any minor, isolated infractions committed by a handful of producers should not be used as a pretext to dismantle an entire, functional, and mutually beneficial trade agreement. Solario views the new tariff policy not as a commercial necessity driven by market dynamics, but as a politically motivated maneuver, divorced from both sound economic logic and objective data. He firmly believes that the original agreement was largely successful in achieving its stated goals, and that its abrupt termination is an irrational and punitive act. This profound divergence in perspectives highlights the deep-seated political and economic chasms that separate the American and Mexican agricultural sectors, transforming a complex trade dispute into a highly charged and ideological battle, one where national interests and political maneuvering appear to have trumped economic collaboration. The uneven economic landscape, corporate resilience versus small business fragility. Economists and industry analysts are already providing a clear and concerning picture of the potential economic fallout from the new tariffs, predicting a market-wide disruption. Timothy Richards, a professor of agribusiness at Arizona State University, has provided a stark and detailed forecast for the market, predicting a domino effect of negative consequences. He estimates that the tariffs could trigger an approximate 10% increase in consumer prices for tomatoes, which could, in turn, lead to a corresponding 5% decrease in overall demand. This dual impact of higher prices and lower consumption would create a significant headwind for the industry. Given that the United States is the single largest market for Mexican tomato exports, and a substantial portion of the fresh tomatoes consumed by Americans are sourced from Mexico, these tariffs are expected to directly result in a reduction of imports and, consequently, a significant price increase for consumers at both grocery stores and restaurants, with the average price of field-grown tomatoes already hovering around $1.70 per pound as of early 2025. This new policy is set to place an additional and unwelcome financial burden on household budgets across the country, potentially forcing families to make difficult choices about their food purchases. The impact, however, will be far from uniform, creating a significant and stark competitive imbalance within the food industry. Larger corporations, with their vast financial resources, global reach, and sophisticated, diversified supply chains, are far better equipped to absorb these costs or strategically pivot their sourcing strategies. Several major players have already demonstrated their resilience to the new trade policy. For example, Heinz has publicly declared that it exclusively uses domestically grown tomatoes for all of its ketchup products sold within the United States, thereby making it immune to the new tariffs. Similarly, DiGiorno prominently advertises on its website that its frozen pizza sauces are crafted with tomatoes sourced exclusively from California. By relying on domestic suppliers, these corporate giants are effectively shielded from the negative effects of the tariffs, giving them a distinct and powerful advantage over their smaller competitors. This creates a significant and potentially insurmountable challenge for small, independent businesses like Razzo's restaurants. Unlike large corporations with the financial and logistical power to adjust their supply chains on a whim, small business owners have limited flexibility and are disproportionately vulnerable to the economic fallout. The tariffs, in this context, are not merely a trade policy. They're a catalyst for widening the gap between corporate giants and the small businesses that are the very lifeblood of local economies. This decision, intended to protect one sector of the American economy, threatens to harm another, illustrating the complex and often unintended consequences of government intervention in the free market. The future of many small businesses now hangs precariously in the balance, a direct result of a political decision made thousands of miles away.